You're listening to Energy Insiders, a weekly update on clean energy and climate policy with Renew Economy's editor Giles Parkinson and leading energy analyst David Leach. Energy Insiders is brought to you by Evergen, providing cutting-edge energy management software for battery optimisation, virtual power plants and distributed energy resources. And Pylon, helping solar installers and retailers design high-resolution solar proposals in minutes.
Well, hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Energy Insiders. In fact, it's a special bonus episode of the Energy Insiders podcast because we've managed to do a couple of interviews before and during the Clean Energy Summit. And joining me, as usual, but in a completely, a new attire and in a new environment and sitting here on the stage in front of the camera for those watching it on video is David Leach from ITK. I trust you well, David. You're looking very well. I can actually attest now that you're looking well.
Thanks, Giles, and I hope our audience, both present at the conference and elsewhere, are also well. It's a new conference in the sense this year, or a changing of the guard at the CEC.
It is, yes, and we've got an interview later on in this episode with Kane Thornton, who steps down after 10 or 11 years, I think, and 16 years with the CEC. So it's as you say, a changing of the guard. The big boys are in town.
Before we get on to what you and I have learnt together and separately here, perhaps we've had a couple of big announcements during the week. We've had GenCost, we've had an announcement from Chris Bowen about expanding the CIS, and we've actually had a supplementary announcement from Penny Sharp, who gave a great speech about expanding a form of the LTESA here in New South Wales.
It's been a journalist's nightmare, actually, because we come to these conferences to write lots of stories about what people say, and then people pile all these announcements on at the same time. But look, it's significant because the capacity investment schemes has been expanded by 25%, an extra 8 gigawatts. Interestingly, I thought, David, they were going for 5 gigawatts of storage rather than 3 gigawatts of bulk power. Are you a bit surprised by that? Because I thought bulk power is the thing that we really need.
I do think we need the bulk power. I think in a sense, the expansion of the CIS is interesting and it's great, but we really need to just get on with the contracts that we already have. And as I keep saying, the time frame is not long. It's 2025 now, the second half of 2025. We've got a target of 2030 to get 23 gigawatts of wind and solar operational, plus the firming capacity that will also be built. And that's really not very long at all. We'll come on to one what was said at the conference afterwards in the GenCost, but it did amuse me to hear. I've heard a lot of people talk this week, and half of them just talk, and I sometimes wonder if they really know what they're talking about or even care what they're talking about, because a bunch of financiers were asked what would most speed up the transition, and of course they all said transmission as usual, and except one did mention community relations. I don't know about you, Giles, but I think the thing that could most speed up the transition would be for somehow, the Nationals to come on board, because that would make the resistance in the regional areas melt away.
Well, it certainly would. And look, speaking of the conference, I guess we're getting into that now. First of all, I'm going to just mention the GenCost report, because that was actually really important from the CSIRO and AEMO, basically confirming what we already knew, that integrated renewables are by far the cheapest now and in 2030. Solar and storage continue to come down. Storage is coming down quickly. Wind costs have gone slightly up because they've dialed in the cost of worker camps, which is an interesting one. And the discount rate has also been changed, but really no change there. In general conclusions, nuclear, I know nuclear's not going to happen, but it was just quite interestingly just to have a real world experience, a real world contract in Canada, which just proved that the CSIRO were quite right in their estimations. And so that's good. And they've even noticed that the nuclear lobby has walked away.
All the discussion I've heard here was also around offshore wind and how incredibly expensive that's going to be. I still think very much that Victoria's going down the wrong path by pursuing offshore wind.
Yeah, you said that before, and you will say that again. And it's yes.
People listen to us to an extent because we I'm an analyst. We just call the numbers like we see them.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting in the corridors. You heard about the costs, probably at the high end of what we've been thinking. There was some discussion about whether Chinese panels could be significantly cheaper than other turbines. And also just on the need about whether Victoria is going to be able to provide sufficient finance and back up itself, or it's going to have to rely on the federal government to list some sort of capacity payment. So that's going to be interesting and I think controversial at the time. I just wanted to mention also the New South Wales announcement for 500 megawatts of dispatchable capacity or firming capacity in the Sydney and load centre regions. And Penny Sharp, I think, gave a pretty good speech.
Penny Sharp it's New South Wales is lucky. We had Matt Keane, who set a whole process in motion and was able to build a coalition for doing what was required.
Yeah.
And politically, you can't underestimate the strength of that. But I think in terms of senior management, Penny Sharp, I've listened to it as an investment banking research analyst. I've been in a lot of meetings with managing directors and CFOs, and you develop an ear for who's got it and who hasn't, and Penny Sharp's got it.
That's interesting. Now,
but whilst we speak of Matt Keane, another piece of news that is quite imminent is the Australia's target that we're going to be setting for 2035, I think it is. And the sort of vibe, we've also had the international, John Grimes brought out.
Well, it wasn't just John Grimes, I think. Yeah, so Jigar Shah from the former founder of Sun Edison, from the Department of, he was heading the Department of Loans Office, $400 billion under management. But look, we'll get to him in a minute. You just talked to him about because we do have an interview with him as well as with Kane. So we've got a lot to pack in this episode. But look, I just wanted to talk about the Climate Change Authority. It's really interesting. Simon Steele from the UN Climate Chief was also out here urging Australia to go as hard as possible.
Yes.
We've had the Climate Council saying we should be at net zero by 2035, which according to the science sounds quite reasonable. Matt Keane is saying let's go as hard as we can, but I don't know whether he's still playing within those parameters of 65 to 75%. We will find out.
I think he sits around in a room, frankly, with Chris Bowen, and they nut out
what they can do.
You know, you can produce endless amounts of research, but in the end, it comes down to what the federal government can accept as a target that they can be held accountable for.
Yeah. And the other thing is that's coming out is the Tim Nelson review. Now, we've had Tim Nelson on a few months ago talking about the review and where he was heading, but we've got a bit more of a hint, I think. He gave a speech at this conference, David, and we've seen a transcript of it. We've got a new acronym on the way.
LTARS, I think it is, or something like that. Every product in financial markets has an acronym. But it seems to be, from what I gather, a 6 to 7 year type of underwriting product that the government will underwrite, similar in some ways as to the CIS, but extending from beyond bulk energy and firming into shaping services, whatever they are, and also into system services such as frequency control and the like. So I think what it amounts to, more or less, is some kind of more insurance kind of product, as from what I can gather, where the government will accept some risk and then return it to the market in due course. I may be misunderstanding what's actually proposed there from the speech. So
yeah, okay. Well, it's going to be interesting. We'll find out in a couple of weeks. David, anything else, finally, other thoughts before we go into our interviews for this episode? I was quite struck by the fact that both Squadron Energy, I think, and Iberdrola were talking about community license and basically saying that the way they'd gone about it up till now was dead in the water and had to think completely differently.
Well, Charles, how would bloody Iberdrola know anything about community license, you know? How would they know anything, as they were saying, about the improvements that several people have noted in the connection process when they haven't bloody well connected anything? Here's Iberdrola. Like, I mark people on what they actually build, right, at the end of the day. In the cases of like AGL and Origin, I can understand their reluctance because they've got coal generation. They're trying to milk every dollar out of it, even though ultimately when they leave their careers, the CEOs of those companies will ask themselves, why did I stand in the way of making this transition, which is going to affect my children and my grandchildren? So why did I stand in the way and make it harder than it had to be? But Iberdrola is like a global multinational, you know? And now we've got its CEO in Australia, who frankly has done very little. One solar farm, as far as I can work out, and one small wind farm. When we're in now the chair of the CEC talking about all the improvements. I mean, I'd like to see him actually put some runs on the scoreboard and then he can talk.
Well, maybe he just found out about it. My understanding is he's had a few calls from sort of local councils and things like that and brought some of the CEOs together to discuss what the issue is. But anyway, this might well be the new CEC that we'll find out when we talk to Kane. But look, first I wanted to introduce Jigar Shah. He's come out from the US. He is the former head of the loans office under the Biden administration, managing $400 billion in funds, an insight into a whole bunch of technologies, and really with some interesting ideas about how Australia could possibly take advantage of the current sort of policy pause or destruction that's happening under the Trump regime. So, and I use that word advisedly, regime, rather than administration. But anyway, let's have a listen to Jigar Shah. Jigar Shah, welcome to the Energy Insiders podcast, and welcome to Australia.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be on the podcast.
What brings you to Australia?
Well, you can imagine that after 4 years of serving in the U.S. government and frankly pursuing really ambitious programs around commercialization and scale up of clean energy technologies, there's certainly a lot of positive and negative lessons that we learned. And so I think there's a lot of interest. Yeah, there's a lot of interest I think people have in making sure that, with all of the resources that Australia has put forward with its own ambition, that it learns from the things that we did right and wrong and doesn't repeat them.
Okay, so you're over here as a sort of a private investor now, or a sort of a coagulator of investment, and talking about investment opportunities and encouraging the government. Is that kind of right? Or
yeah, exactly. I mean, I certainly am here sort of in an unofficial capacity, so not doing business necessarily in Australia, but just trying to be helpful.
Yeah. Let's go back to your last role then, because you were the loans director for the Department of Energy in the Biden administration. $400 billion worth of loans. I mean, that was an extraordinary role. Explain to us what you were doing, and then we'll probably get to why it had to come to an end, or why it came to an end.
Well, when I first took the job, I think you may have known that I was on the Energy Gang podcast for a long time. And I think in October of 2020, someone asked me about the loan programs office, and I said it was irredeemable. So that wasn't a great start. And then they offered me the job to run it in December. And so, I said, well, if I'm going to take this job, I probably have these, 6 or 8 things that I need to make sure it's going to be successful. And they said yes, which was great. So then I joined. At the time at which I joined, it was about $40 billion worth of loan authority that was left from previous budgets. And my first job was frankly just to call 100 companies I knew and said, hey, is this something you would use, right? Why or why not? And what can we do to make changes to make it more attractive? And for a lot of those companies, it was the first time the government had ever called them to say, hey, we see you and we want you to use our program. So, I think one of the big lessons I learned is that government programs are easy to set up, but they rarely proactively reach out to companies to use their programs. They sort of just assume that if they've got money, that the companies will come, and they rarely do.
That's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I would have thought it might have come in some sort of tender or an invitation for offer or something like that. I would have thought if the government said it had a loans program, then sort of companies would be all over them.
Well, I mean, what you find with a lot of these entrepreneurs is they really are sort of libertarian, minded, right? They just sort of want to can-do attitude. I just want to do it on my own and get it done. And, I think the last thing they want to do is to fill out, 2,000 hours worth of paperwork to get some money out of the government. And so, like really getting their trust and understanding what their concerns are, but more importantly, actually doing the things that they tell you that they need. Like, for instance, many of our applicants said, yeah, we'll use the loan programs office, but what we really need your help with is to get the Department of Interior to get off their butt and actually get the permit to us faster. Or we need the Department of Commerce to, solve this tariff issue that we have, or whatever it is, right? And so part of the reason why a lot of the loan applicants used our program was they were able to get us to be their ombudsman throughout the government to get some of the other things to go more smoothly.
And so tell us a little bit about the sort of loans that you did make and how they were successful.
So there were a couple of big programs that we had going in. One was the Advanced Technology Vehicle Manufacturing Program. And so that was really to help with electric vehicles and some of that stuff. And so, the US had one major battery manufacturing facility when we came into office, right? And that was the Tesla, sort of gigafactory. So we built, 6 additional facilities, right, totaling roughly 250 gigawatt hours of new battery manufacturing capacity, which is, quite substantial and really enough to get to President Biden's goal of 50% of all vehicles sold by 2030 being electric vehicles. And I think my sense is that there's probably another 100 gigawatt hours that's going to get built now, for utility scale batteries as well. So that was a huge accomplishment. But we also got enough lithium projects started in Nevada and California to position the United States to be a net lithium exporter by the early part of the next decade. Graphite processing in Vidalia, Louisiana, from Syrah, like here in Australia, but also some big projects in restarting a nuclear plant, building large transmission projects, really getting virtual power plant business models off the ground, sustainable aviation fuel projects. So really a very diverse set of projects totaling about $108 billion.
Wow. Okay. So kind of similar to our own green banks, sort of like the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, but on a scale, obviously, just because the US is a bigger economy. But
Well, yeah, I was going to say, I mean, the resources you have here are quite impressive. I mean, I think when you total all the different pots of money that I was counting, I think it's probably 50 billion at least Australian, depending on, which categories you count.
it's come to an end now. So you were doing it for 4 years. You were the director of the loans office until January 2025. If as if we need reminding, what happened in January 2025?
That's exactly right. I was kicked out.
Okay. What happened? Tell us how it happened. Did someone get on the phone and say, Jigar, out of here?
No, I mean, when a new president comes in, there's an expectation that the political appointees of the previous president would, resign. So I mean, every political appointee within the Biden administration resigned, and that was expected. So it wasn't something that, Trump did specifically.
Did you write a nice letter?
I did. I was very appreciative of Secretary Granholm and President Biden for allowing me to serve.
Okay. And what's happened to the loans office since?
Well, they've honored all the loans that we closed, and so that's good. And then I think,
And they will continue to do so?
well, I hope so, but you never know. But I hope so, and I think that. And then for the loans that were conditionally committed, they're starting to process some of those, and I'm hoping that they'll close a few of those. So we're excited about that. But I think the bigger thing that we accomplished while I was there was, 920 new manufacturing facilities and or expansions of existing facilities, right, in towns that frankly were devastated by all the manufacturing facilities that shut down over the last 30 years in the United States. And so it really brought hope to a lot of towns across the country, including my own hometown of Sterling, Illinois, that lost the 7th largest steel mill in the country.
Wow. And what's their future now? Because under the new regime, there's a completely different focus. I mean, I guess the biggest factor might be the tariffs, because even if you have a manufacturing facility, they're sourcing raw materials or parts from other countries, and they might get hit by tariffs. So what's your assessment? Where are we at? I mean, there's a lot to discuss and unpack, I guess, about the Trump administration and what they're doing to clean energy and how that's, seems like there's a lost opportunity, and maybe you can give some flavor of.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing to assess. I mean, obviously the OBBB that was just passed really had it out for the solar and wind industry. And so, it's after, lying under the radar screen for a long time, we clearly had a target on our back. So those were largely sunsetted early. But amazingly, the vast majority of the IRA was left in place, right? So whether it was the 45X production tax credits for the battery manufacturing facilities and solar manufacturing facilities and critical minerals facilities, the hydrogen incentives were all left in place. The geothermal, nuclear, hydro incentives were all left in place. And so a large part of the original Inflation Reduction Act was left in place. And so that's truly impressive. So I think that, there's a lot of people who want to write it off, but I think the political experiment that we waged really with the Inflation Reduction Act largely held. So I think that's a huge insight. And the other big insight is that the solar and wind industry can't, lie out of sight anymore. I mean, we're directly in the crosshairs, which makes sense. I mean, we're 90% of all new capacity added to the grid last year was solar and wind. And so you can imagine that there's a lot of people who feel threatened by that.
Yeah. And do you expect that to continue to be the case?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the most competent developers in the United States, but also in Australia, are the solar and wind developers as well as the battery developers. And so, I mean, competence gets you most of the way there.
Okay. And they'll be able to find their way around the restrictions and the barriers and what have you. I mean, the technology costs, I guess, are pretty imposing now.
Yeah, they always do. I mean, you can't keep a good industry down, right? So you can try to put more barriers in the way, and then you realize they're actually really good hurdle jumpers.
You mentioned in a recent podcast, and I think it was the Energy Gang podcast, about how the US had lost, I think, on more than one occasion, just its sort of natural advantage and set up sort of industries, and basically the likes of BYD and cattle had come in and just sort of taken that know-how and brought it back to China. I mean, Australia's done a similar thing in the sense that we've developed a lot of the solar PV know-how and technology in Australian universities, but that sort of, some of the Chinese students have gone back to the country and developed the industry there. And look, there's reasons why China is a manufacturing powerhouse. Do you fear that the US might be losing out again because the US seems to think it's in this massive race with China, but we're not too sure whether they're making the right moves?
Yeah, I mean, that's Martin Green, right? At the University of New South Wales. And, Dr. Shi, one of his prized PhD students that went back and created Suntech in China. No, for sure. I think that in Clean Tech 1.0, a lot of those technologies went bankrupt, and the Chinese took those technologies or stole those technologies, right? And whether it's A123 batteries or many others, and took them over to China to scale them up. I think in this time around, I think that many of those companies are quite strong. And so I think if they're no longer invited to build their first of a kind factory in the United States, I do think that they should look at Australia as a great place to do that work, or the EU or the UK or Canada or other places. And so, I mean, I am worried though that the Australian government and, many other places around the world are not cold calling a lot of these companies, reminding them they have these extraordinary programs. Because if they do go bankrupt, I do worry that they're going to end up in China.
So tell us a bit more about those opportunities, and what should the Australian government be doing, and who should they be calling, and what sort of industries should they be targeting?
Well, I think critical minerals is obviously a natural fit for Australia, just given the ore that it has. But the beauty is of Australian companies and American companies, we have next generation technologies where we're not using as much sulfuric acid. We're doing all of the environmentally harmful approaches to processing that, but instead using next generation technology that's quite a bit cheaper than what China does now, but it has to be scaled up, right? And so I think a lot of those technologies are available to either, build their first project or even their second and third projects in Australia. And so I think they should be cold calling a lot of those companies, and it would be great to. And luckily, we have a list of them all, so it's not like they have to go hunting. We have a list of all the companies that got grants and loans, and they were competitively bid out. So these are the best of the best, right? But I also think in green iron, I think in wind turbine, next generation towers. There's a lot of sectors where, the Australians really should be attracting those companies to its shores.
So why would these companies be interested in coming here, and why do they need to leave the US or expand beyond the US? I mean, I'm just not entirely clear about that.
Well, I think as you suggested, I mean, the environment in the United States is quite chaotic right now, given tariffs one day and then gone the next day because of the taco phenomenon, and then you go back and like they're back on. And so, we'll see, where they end up. But I do think that Australia, has a stable government in place for the next 6 years, right? So like when you think about the way in which their environment is sort of conducive to some of these scale-up programs, I think Australia, ends up being a great place. But more importantly, Australia has these extraordinary trade agreements with India and Indonesia and all these other countries that are itself scaling up battery manufacturing and lots of other technologies. And so its critical minerals are, being prized by folks around the world. Because remember, this is not just a clean tech sector, right, thing, which we all know is the largest wealth creation opportunity of our lifetimes. but it's also a national security issue, right? I mean, there's a lot of people who want to diversify their supply chains, and Australia, I think, can play a huge role there.
So what would the Australian governments need to do then, apart from ring them up? I mean, what would they need to offer? Land, loans?
Honestly, it's just ringing them up. I think, and obviously, when you look at the, CEFC or Arena or NFR or other institutions, I think many of them run quite conservatively, and so giving them some permission to take more risk, right, and to really lean in. And when I say take more risk, I don't mean lose money, right? I mean taking more risk doesn't mean that you have to structure the loans or structure the grants badly. It just means that you have to bet on people who are not large corporations, and like start supporting some of the earlier stage companies and some of the folks who don't have $1 billion in the bank, but who actually deserve your support because the technologies have really got the backing of the scientific community and have met a lot of their development milestones.
Yeah, and that's an interesting change of mindset, isn't it? I mean, you said that when you came in into the Department of the loans facility at the Department of Energy, no one had done that before. So trying to get the Australian government, I doubt if they've done that before. They've set up programs, they've waited for people to come to them. But this is a different thing, isn't it? This is actually going out, being proactive, getting on the phone and saying, hey, you might have an issue, come here. Because who else might, yeah.
I think that's right. The other thing that we did, though, is we listened. And a lot of the companies had a lot to say, right? They said, well, not only do we need these resources, but we also need these permitting issues to get, easier. We need to get this thing resolved. We need to, figure out how to raise capital, right? So part of what we did was we listened to what they were talking about. And, we had better access to data than anyone else in the country, right? Because we had the 500, 600 best projects in the country giving us all their proprietary data. So then we anonymized a lot of that data and we published liftoff reports and these fact bases. And those fact bases were used by investors to crowd in $100 billion of investment, right? And so when you think about not just the 50 billion Australian in all these loan funds and grant funds, but you also have these other softer things that can be done to actually make Australia a more inviting place in terms of streamlining permitting, figuring out what these liftoff reports look like to crowd in more investment capital.
Mm. And have you made any soundings so far? And what's been what's the reaction that you've sensed so far? Or have you yet to do those big talks?
Oh, the reaction's been great. I mean, I just landed this morning, so a lot more meetings to do. But Monday has.
I feel like the old ABC television cameraman when people used to sort of famous people arrived in Australia, they sort of get off on the tarmac, and the immediate question was, "What do you think of Australia?" So,
well, I've been coming to Australia for over 25 years. I mean, I first started working for BP Solar. We had a manufacturing facility in Sydney, and so been coming regularly. It's just a beautiful place with just so much excitement, fervor, entrepreneurial energy.
I didn't realize that you were from BP Solar in those days. There's quite a crew there. So
Well, it really is an extraordinary crew. Mark Twidle and so many amazing people.
Yeah. What technologies excite you at the moment then? I mean, you've been this director of loans, you've had a lot of money to hand out, you've had lots of people, you've reached out, you've had lots of people coming in there. The technologies that excite you over the next 5, 10, or even beyond, because we might be thinking about things that don't quite exist yet. But
well, I think you start with the technologies we already have, but haven't really gone to scale with. So when you look at the battery attachment rate for residential solar and commercial solar in Australia has been quite low. I mean, with the new policies that the government's put in place, it looks like it's jumped up to a third of all new systems now have batteries. And my sense is that'll be close to 100% of all new systems probably by the end of the year with batteries. And that's exciting because that unlocks the ability to install virtual power plants across the country. And that means that solar will no longer be a solution just for the people who put it on their roof, but is also a solution to make sure that energy stays affordable for everyone in Australia, right? By shaving all the peaks. So I'm super excited about the leadership that Australia's had there for 10 years, but the leadership that they're extending in that area as well. So, but I also think long duration energy storage is going to come in, right? When you think about the fact that you have cloudy days for multiple days on end, et cetera. And I think you're going to start seeing a lot of long duration energy storage technologies come in to the Australian market. So I think that's super exciting as well.
And what sort of long duration storage? I mean, will it be batteries? Will it be pumped hydro? Will it be advanced compressed air, solar
I
thermal?
mean,
Mixture of all the above?
it's great to be excited about everything, right? But I mean, we gave a loan to EOS, which is zinc halide battery technology, which has been amazing, and they've already met the costs of lithium ion and 8 to 12 hour battery formats. I think obviously Form Energy in the US has an iron battery, which is more like 100 plus hour battery storage. We did the Delta ACES project in Utah, which was seasonal storage using clean hydrogen in salt caverns and saved there, which is really amazing technology. We did the HydroStor project in California, right, which was compressed air energy storage. And so I'm a huge fan of all of the above. It's an amazing time to be a part of the clean tech sector because there were 5,000 companies that got venture capital since 2017. 1,600 of them are still kicking and thriving. And many of them actually deserve to make it to the other side.
That's fascinating what you're saying about those technologies for long duration storage, because in Australia, I think the assumption at the moment is we're going to need gas for a lot longer, even if it's just peaking power stations and we switch them on for 1 or 2 days a year, or 3 or 4 or 5 days a year, or whatever. And the fact that those long duration storage, the iron batteries, the compressed air, is interesting. They're coming to the Broken Hill as well. I think we've got a project running there. So some of them are on the way here, but yeah.
No, I'm excited. And look, I think, Australia has a lot going for it, including natural gas and other resources. I think it's important to recognize that this transition has to be done affordably. And I think that we can do it by 2035 and 2050. But I think it's important for us to recognize that a lot of these technologies are scaling up, right? I mean, obviously solar and lithium ion battery storage has already scaled up. But I think you've got the rest of these technologies that now need to scale up. And the policies that Australia has are perfect to do a lot of that scale up.
So those technologies that you've talked about, the ion batteries and those compressed air systems and the other ones, you think that's Australia's opportunity because they might not get that opportunity in the US now?
Well, certainly, I think that the U.S. continues to be an attractive market for some of the technologies, but a lot of the manufacturing projects, as we discussed, are plagued by ever-changing tariffs and all sorts of other things, right? So you can imagine whether it's their first manufacturing plant or their second manufacturing plant, I think Australia is a great choice for them. And I think when you think about the commitment to the Made in Australia effort, right, I do think it's incredibly important for the clean energy sector to recognize that not only should we be deploying a lot of these technologies in Australia, but we should be making the stuff that makes financial sense to make here in Australia as well.
Tell us about places like California and Texas, because they've been absolutely fascinating in the sense of the pace of their energy transitions, the role of battery storage now you're seeing in both markets. They're playing a dominant role in the evening peaks and now the morning peaks as well. They've got high renewable shares. Are they still going to continue to evolve at the rate that they've evolved in the past because they've got strong, well, I mean, I guess Texas is an interesting one because they don't necessarily have a supportive government, but they've got a grid that evolves right in front of them, despite them almost.
Well, I think it's important to note that the last two legislative cycles tried to ban, and really significantly hurt solar projects in Texas. And, it's the conservatives in Texas that rejected those proposals, right? Because they recognized that the reason why electricity was remaining so cheap in Texas is because of all of the new solar and battery storage projects. Like if you look at the, heat wave that they had in March, right, which was completely unexpected, a lot of the natural gas power plants were in maintenance during that unexpected heat wave, and thank God for those solar and battery storage projects that that kept electricity very cheap in Texas, right? And so I think there has been a consistent message from the transmission operator in Texas that really the only way that they're going to be able to meet the load growth. Remember, they're going to have 50% load growth over the next 4 or 5 years in Texas, 50%. And the electricity operator there is saying the only way to do that is through new solar and battery storage. And so, it's one of those things where sometimes the social media memes actually gets, confronted with physics, and physics wins.
And that load growth, is that coming from electrification or mostly data centers and AI and things like that?
Data centers, but also there's a huge number of people in Texas that are moving to electric vehicles, right? And heat pumps, right? And so when you think about just how much load growth there is, it's not just data centers, although that is a very large part of it. It's also new manufacturing. They have a huge semiconductor manufacturing facility going into Texas. There's a lot of new, just general manufacturing in the solar and wires and like lots of other spaces in the clean energy supply chain.
Yeah. And have you thought about sort of data centers and AI and their potential role in the grid with, as flexible generation or flexible load, and how they might sort of fit into a modern grid? I mean, with renewables, grid and storage, it's all going to be about flexibility.
Well, I think it's two separate points. I mean, one is that data centers don't want to be flexible, right? They can be flexible if you actually force them to be flexible. And so I think you're seeing a lot of utilities and transmission operators saying, we will interconnect you, but only if you're flexible 150 hours a year. And they say begrudgingly, okay, fine. And it's fine because it's $10 billion for the data center and it's $200 million with the batteries to make them flexible. So, a lot of them are like, okay, fine, we'll do it. So I think they're being forced to be good neighbors, which is good. But the other thing that's interesting is when you think about the sector that has the most unstructured data that needs to be decisionable, it's utilities. Utilities have tons of data from advanced metering initiatives to, distribution sensors to other things, and they're not using any of that data to really make the utility run more efficiently. And so you see a ton of great companies like Think Labs in Toronto, where they're have proven with Southern California Edison that they can do load interconnection agreements, not just in 45 days, they can do it in 4 hours, right? And Pearl Street, right, with the Midwest Independent System Operator, was able to take interconnection for new generators that take 22,000 hours to do the interconnection study and do it in 4 days, right? And so when you think about just how AI is being used to accelerate the clean energy transition, there's super excitement there too.
Yeah, yeah. Just getting back into politics, because we look at the US from Australia. I mean, look, I just can't, because I still scratch my head, and I think a lot of people do are scratching their heads about what the heck is going on over there. The new energy secretary, the interior secretary, and the other sort of senior sort of secretaries there. Have you talked to them or tried to talk to them? Where do they come from? Where are they getting off? Are they for turning?
Well, it's tough to talk to them, right? I mean, when you think about like everyone is basically decided that they're the way that they ingratiate themselves with, the president is through social media posts, right? And so there's all sorts of craziness that's being posted on the web that doesn't make any sense. Like, bringing coal back. Okay, but almost all of our coal plants in the United States are 9 cents a kilowatt hour to produce power. So that's super expensive. And the coal supply chain is now in China. So what? You're going to import all this equipment from China to make coal plants in the United States? Never going to happen. So everyone knows that it's never going to happen, but they're still posting about it on social media, right? And so when you think about where natural gas is, 43% of all the power generated in the United States last year was from natural gas. So it's not like we're not using natural gas. And nobody wants to make that a higher percent. Everybody wants a diversified portfolio of generation, right? And 80% of all new interconnections are still coming from solar and battery storage. So like I said, there's the social media memes, and then there's physics. And, physics always wins, but Lord Almighty, like there's a whole bunch of misinformation out there.
And that presents the opportunity over these next 5-10 years for Australia to jump in and seize the opportunity. So,
well, there's certainly a lot of extraordinary companies that, frankly, I think deserve a shot at really being able to scale up their next generation technologies. And I think Australia is a fantastic place for them to come, just given how stable your government is and how extraordinary your policies are. And I think the real key is to get the government to recognize that, that these, institutions have to lean in, right? They've got to become more customer service friendly, and they've got to, really help these companies use these services.
Well, Jigar Shah, thank you very much for joining the podcast, and all the best for the rest of your trip in Australia.
Thanks for having me.
And that was Jigar Shah from the Department of Loans, formerly from the Department of Loans Office in the US administration. This Clean Energy Summit, as we've discussed, is also the last one for Kane Thornton, who's been the head of the CEC for the last 11 years, at the office for 16 years. And look, I thought it would be interesting enough to catch up with Kane, just to sort of reflect on those years and what he's got planned and how the CE has transitioned and how it actually may transition into the future. So let's have a listen to my chat with Kane. Kane Thornton, welcome back to the Energy Insiders podcast. And for those of us listening to the podcast, we're actually on stage in front of a camera, and it's a bit weird because we're both wearing suits.
It's great to be here. It's amazing to see you in a suit.
Well, I thought you might be in your bicycle gear, but
not yet.
Not yet. Not yet.
I've got it underneath. No one needs to see that. Just to be clear, once the cameras are off.
I thought it must be really frustrating for you that your last Clean Energy Summit would be on the same time as the Tour de France. Because
No.
I'm thinking that, maybe that's why you're not speaking, because you're watching.
To be honest, it was perfect. The Tour de France finished on Sunday night. The conference started on Monday, so it was perfectly. That wasn't my decision.
Okay, so I'm actually behind the times. I thought it was still going.
All done. Mate, all done.
Right.
You're way behind the times.
So you're leaving the Clean Energy Council. You shocked me.
Really, 16 years. I was going to
16 years.
I was going to have to leave someday.
Yes. But why now?
Look, 16 years is a long time. It's an intense, all-consuming role. But probably the main factor, really, I made up my mind on it earlier in the year, and it was really in the context, particularly of the federal election. Whatever happened at the federal election, we're either going to take a U-turn and go down some strange pathway towards nuclear that I wasn't.
You didn't want to be there.
That wasn't going to be my gig.
No.
Or we were going to get a mandate to really double down and push on for the transition. And I felt like that was the moment where that would require, in the right time, for a new energy and a new leadership at the Clean Energy Council. It was also my 50th birthday yesterday, in fact. So it was my 50th year. And so all those things together just made it feel like this feels like the right time to hand the baton over. I need a break. I'll take some time and space to rejuvenate, turn my phone off, all those things. And it's time for someone else to take it forward to the next chapter.
Yeah. God, the end of the Tour de France, 50th birthday, the Clean Energy Summit. It was written really.
Invited back to your podcast. What a week!
Success after success.
There's some big milestones this week.
Yeah, and then this week we've also had the announcement of the increase in the capacity investment scheme. So as you say, we've now got a government that clearly supports the renewable transition, despite a few issues, which we can probably discuss, and some state governments sort of trying to roll it backwards. But that must be pretty satisfying to leave at that point.
Yeah, I think that's right. The mandate, I think that, both the government received on May 3rd at the federal election, but I think more widely, if it was a referendum on the energy transition, there was an unambiguous result and a clear direction that we are going to continue this path. You and I both know it wasn't really like the alternative path was somewhere between a disaster and not really practical anyway. But the Australian public spoke loudly, and it's now time to get on with it.
Yeah.
And I think that's really exciting, I think, for the industry, and I think for me personally, to leave in that context, noting that kind of momentum and upward trajectory is really exciting.
So in your time at the CEC and as leader, you've been leader since?
There for nearly 16 years, CEO for a bit, almost 11.
Wow. Yeah. And the triumphs in that thing. Can you think of what you did really well, and then I'm going to ask you what you stuffed up.
Oh, I'll write a book about the mistakes I've made over the. No one wants to read that, do they?
Yes, they do.
Look. So the successes, to be honest, there's probably a few ways I think about this. One is, there were some big moments. Big moment I think was resolving the Abbott review of the RET.
Because they really wanted to kill it.
That was both one of the low moments because of what it did to the industry for that kind of 2-year period. It froze the industry. And so resolving that and seeing industry take off and what got built essentially out the back of that was pretty extraordinary. I think a bit similar. I'm super proud of the campaign that we ran in the 6 months leading up to the recent federal election. That was a whole new level, I think, of sophistication and maturity of an industry campaign. Super proud of that, and obviously then the the outcome that followed. But to be honest, what I'm probably just as proud about is a whole lot of small things that, to be honest, are really important for the foundation. I mean, I have the privilege of getting to work with 70 or 80 really talented people doing really important work. You've had some of them on your podcast before, but helping to improve connection of renewables to the electricity grid.
That's been a pretty important reform, actually. It's just sort of, because now we have a target, we now have a mechanism, we can now connect to the grid. Well, there's a few things to fall into place, but yes.
3 or 4 years ago, that grid connection was the single biggest challenge for the sector. Yeah. And I feel like we've made a lot of progress on that. There's more work to do. But, right through to, last year we released a guide for how industry can engage and partner with First Nations communities on projects. We've done work around modern slavery in the supply chain, all of these things, the regulatory structures for household batteries, all of these things that on one level they're boring, they're really technical, but they're really important for an industry to kind of build a foundation and continue to mature. So there's lots of those small things and lots of people that I feel like I've helped to support and, develop and grow.
What's the next most important thing? You've talked about the connections the connections agreement, and that's been really important, and some of the other things which build those foundations. But there's issues. I mean, social licence has reared its head again. So,
look, I think social licence is right at the top of them. While I think we need to be really careful in how we interpret the federal election outcome. Yes, there was a mandate, no question about it, but we can't be complacent. We've got more work to do as an industry, and I think that's multifaceted, but it is making sure that we're better coordinated in those kind of res regions. We're minimising the negative impacts, and so how do we deal with fixing roads? How do we deal with environmental footprint, etc.? How do we, on the other side of that, how do we make sure we're leaving positive, lasting benefits to communities? And tonight there'll be an awards program that'll celebrate and reflect on some great examples of that. There's some fantastic work being done. I think, what we saw in the federal election is there's still an enormous amount of mis and disinformation, and we've got a role to play, and I think industry to continue to step up and counter that and make sure people are well informed about what it might mean and the benefits and possible impact. So that social licence piece, I think, is right at the top. I think building out, and it's closely related, but building out the grid and the transmission system. I mean, I think in a way, if you consider the sort of climate wars of the last 10 years, I think the build out of transmission is probably the most significant impact that's had, because really we should have been building the grid out and starting on that 10 and 20 years ago. We wasted a fair bit of that time. We've now got our skates on, but it takes years.
And it wasn't handled the best way. There was, people didn't talk to farmers and things like that. As Penny Sharp admitted on this podcast a few months ago, and clearly in Victoria there's been issues and it's gone about the wrong way. And they're trying to, and that's really hard. That is really hard.
It's really
having cascading effects on the rest of the.
And it's really hard to recover. I mean, I think what we learn is if you make mistakes in communities, it's a hard path back. It's better to get it right up front. That's then hard enough. But so the grid is definitely a part of it. I think things like planning and environmental reform, I think there's a lot of momentum. I think we've done a lot of good work over the last year or two, particularly with the states. EPBC reform is now on the agenda. I think that's probably over the next year or so going to be really important. Today we've had those various announcements on expanding the capacity investment scheme in New South Wales, so making sure that those policies work and deliver and ultimately get on to projects reaching financial close and moving into construction. I think that's important.
What are some of the things that you wish you'd done better, or maybe been a bit more aggressive on, or thrown a few more bricks through windows and things like that?
Look, it's really. There's lots of things in hindsight that I'm like, I didn't see that or didn't quite anticipate that. I must say, I thought there'd actually be more consolidation in the industry over the last sort of 3 or 5 years, probably particularly in the small scale sector. There's still thousands of small businesses, and once
Bunnings is trying to change that.
Well, that's right. Now, but to be honest, if you look at most segments of the economy, over time, airlines, supermarkets, whatever, they tend to. There's consolidation, so that hasn't happened. Look, I don't have many, at the end of the day, I feel like I've made the best judgment and decisions I could at that moment in time. I mean, I think at some points in time, our approach to advocacy has generally been to work constructively with government in good faith, whoever the government might be, to try and get better outcomes. And there's no doubt there's times where we were probably being overly generous and, at some point, actually, the only way to have influence is to confront the public and mount more public campaigns. To be honest, for every campaign or even every media statement we make, I'll get people say, oh, you're going a bit hard, aren't you? Just as many as I get people saying, oh, you should have gone hard enough. And so, when you're in a role like this, every day there's words coming out from me. I feel like I've been honest and authentic and used my best judgment. To be honest, often with insight, not to be arrogant, that other people don't have because of the position I'm in. You look back, some days I'm like, oh, did I use that word? I meant to use that one, or could have gone a bit, or whatever. Why is this minister, calling my mobile phone, trying to yell at me?
Yes, repeatedly.
That's right. So to be honest, I don't have regret in all of that. I feel like I was honest, acted with integrity, used our best judgment, had influence. And I think some people think the only way to have influence is to, yell at someone or throw a brick through their window. It's more complicated than that. And yes, there's a time to be assertive and firm, but there's other tactics and strategies, and sometimes a longer game at play, and sometimes we were a bit, whatever, you might pull a punch a little bit here, knowing that there's something else over here that's actually much more important and will make progress. So,
yeah. And there's a few other people leaving with you at the same time. Aaron Wood, Christian Zur, to mention just two, and I think there's others as well. So a bit of a changing of the guard. And I guess there's been a bit of a changing in the board as well in the CEC. Do you think the CEC going forward is going to be, has it got different games to play? Is it going to be playing a different role?
Oh, look, I think there's a constant evolution. When you're a peak body in a sector like this that changes, for the last 15 years, probably every 6 months we'd have a strategy review and check in, and you'd sit there and go, right, something else has changed. Okay, well, we'll dial back doing that stuff, and we now need to lean into this. And given the inflection point that the industry is at, it's quite natural. And, we had a strategy workshop with the board only a few months ago, and you sit there and say, gee, we're in a different environment now to 6 months ago. We need to lean into this. Actually, some of these other areas are done and complete, and we can dial back on those. So that's just a natural, I think, cycle and evolution. Look, I think, when I made my mind up to move on, I always knew, and I don't want to sound arrogant, but there's people that I work closely with, or probably people who joined the Clean Energy Council to work with me. It's natural enough that they'll then say, oh, well, it's time to do something different. And if Kane's moving on, maybe I'll reflect on my role in the industry and move on. So to be honest, it's just a natural, I see it as a pretty natural cycle.
And what's next for Kane Thornton?
Taking a break.
Set
a deep breath and sigh,
Talk to the kids. Meet the kids.
Oh, no, hey, that's not fair, mate. They're now 16 and 18, so I'm not sure how excited they are to have a lot of me in their life. But, look, it's been an intense 16 years, so I'm just going to take some time to stop a bit, sleep-ins, daytime TV. Is that still a thing?
Well, look, apart from Energy Insiders, I'm not really too sure what else you
want to tune in. There's some episodes of Energy Insiders I've got to catch up on. So look, I just want to decompress, stop, hang out with family and friends for a while. And then I've got a long list of mountains I want to hike up, places I want to ride my bike. I want to full drive across the Simpson Desert.
Seriously? Okay. Don't tow a caravan, I'm told.
No, not so. Just me and my swag and a bottle of something. Lots of water, I guess.
Fantastic.
I just want to do that for 6 months. I'm very privileged. It feels very self-indulgent, but I feel like I'm at a stage of life just to have a break, decompress from all of that, find myself, figure out what next. I've been in this sector for 20 years because I'm passionate about it. That hasn't changed. Yeah. And so I'm pretty sure you'll have me back on, won't you? Well,
swag across the desert, you could do it. And this is Kane.
Coming live from the outback of Australia.
Discovering an Andrew Forrest wind turbine out there somewhere.
Yeah, so look, and then I'll figure out, I'll take a good long break and then come back and figure out how I can play a role. I'll be really focused on what's the interesting work to do and who are the good people out there I want to do it with, and I'm in a privileged position to take some time to find that.
And when you see the transition that you've been working so hard on in the last 20 years, are you confident that we're going to kind of get there? I mean, we're hearing more scary climate. I don't want to end on a bit of a downer, but I mean, I'm finding myself asking this question all the time.
Yeah.
A lot of people have done a lot of work to try and accelerate this transition, to try and keep it on track, and then we think, God, have we done enough?
Yeah, look, I think I've said this to you before, but I don't spend much time looking at the climate issue and data and science because, to be honest, I find it fairly demotivating and a bit disturbing. What I know is that one constant over the last 15 years is I've seen a lot of my time confronting people who say this can't be done. And back in the day, it was like, we can't achieve the 2% RET or the 10% RET or the 20% RET. Well, hello, we're now at 40% and got enormous momentum. Yeah. So I sit here incredibly proud of what the industry's done over that 15 years. And, there's plenty of discussion about 82%, can it be met? If the target's set, the policy's certain, we've got the right policy and market and regulatory reform and measures in place, as well as I do. It's an enormous industry. There's a massive pipeline of projects around the country. There's no shortage of capital. There's kind of nothing that can't be done if the will's there. And our job, I'll say their job as the peak body pretty soon, is to kind of keep working through those challenges and remove them. So I kind of leave with this optimism that, there's a lot of momentum. We've doubled the amount of renewables in the last 5 years. We're on track to doubling it again in coming years. And exactly, in 3 or 4 years' time, you'll be sitting here saying, did we get exactly the 82? Or there'll be another target by then for 2035 or 40. And the momentum's all heading in the same direction. And how well policymakers and industry and others do over the coming years will determine how quickly we get to some of those numbers. But there's no doubt, whether it's the closure of coal or the climate crisis or the need for jobs in regional Australia or the uptake of electric vehicles in people's homes, we need a lot of clean energy, and it's been pretty incredibly rewarding to be part of that journey and see and watch where it goes to from here.
Well, Kane, congratulations and thanks for this appearance and all the past appearances on the Energy Insiders podcast, and all the best for the future.
Thanks, Charles. Thanks very much. Really, and the work that you do has been really valuable, and long may it continue. And I look forward to coming back and joining again someday from somewhere.
Most welcome. From the Simpson Desert, it could be interesting. Don't wear lycra in the desert, okay?
No lycra, I promise.
And that was Kane Thornton from the CEC. David, it is going to be interesting to see how the CEC evolves and the rest of this transition, I suppose. It's now, for the CEC, it's now the big players taking all the reins of it, one would seem. And these are the guys that really got to get out there and start building this stuff.
Well, there's been a lot of talk. Again, I hear people talk about lowest cost. It's incredible to me to stand up and hear people like from Origin and Energy Australia talking about lowest cost, which undoubtedly is solar and has been for a long time. But these guys, of all the people involved, should understand it's value, not cost, that actually matters. Is solar the best value? Is solar plus batteries better value? Is it worth continuing to fight for the transmission so that we can build the wind? We talk about productivity. What can we do to actually stage all these wind farms? So if I look in the, as we've discussed with Anthony Fowler before, at all the generation that's going to be built in the Arana zone, you're going to have Valley of the Winds there, which is 1,000 megawatts, assuming it gets through its environment court case, which I think it will. And then you're going to have Liverpool Range, it's another 1.3 gigawatts of wind. Origin may eventually even build its wind farm Yanco down near Jerilderie. That's another gigawatt. We've also got other big wind farms in New South Wales that could be built, maybe even without the transmission. Now, the question is, how do you stage that so that Australians, everyone benefits from it? Do you want to race and compete for turbines and or is it, are we going to run into skills shortages of people that are actually capable of managing 1,000 gigawatt, $3 or $4 billion projects? Who sits there on top of the whole thing and makes sure that the execution goes well? How many of those people are there? What can we do on this balance of payments? We have heard, and I think Mark Collette said quite correctly, that wind generation is half the price in China, although it's hardly an astonishing statement because everything in China is about half the price of everywhere else.
Yep.
But what, in all seriousness, can we do to manage the costs that are within Australia's control, whether it's the cost of finance or whether it's the concrete cost, whether it's the turbine crane operators? There's a lot of things that I think, we could do to manage and stage that and get it done, from a command and control perspective that might result in reducing the cost a bit along the way. Or the alternative is to just let everyone go for it, let the market sort itself out, and the most efficient operators will survive. And that's not necessarily the wrong model either.
Well, I'm not too sure I got a really answer for you, but I will finish off by noting that I've just come from a session on the battery storage, large-scale battery storage, and there's a lot of discussion about 4 hours and 8 hour batteries, and the point was made by the majority of the panel, but not all the panel, that really, if you want an 8 hour battery, then just get a 1 hour battery and run it over 8 hours, which is exactly the point that you've been making. I wanted you to know that beforehand, that without people out there listening to you, they might have already thought that, but they're now thinking that.
Well, I don't even like this idea of long duration storage, right? What we want to talk about is the quantity of storage hours that we need, right? And how much power that storage has got is pretty irrelevant. It's the total quantity of storage that you need to see you through seasonal wind and solar droughts. Or in the alternative, and this is the other point that's missing from all this reform, we have to have enough competition. I wrote an article this week, Giles, about price spikes, and it was an interesting article. And
it was a very interesting article.
Had feedback on it. And some of the feedback's been along the line, well, actually, there was enough capacity to prevent the price spike.
But it just wasn't deployed.
But it wasn't deployed because there wasn't sufficient competition. So one of the most useful things, batteries by their nature allow more entrance into the market, because if you're going to be supplying peak with gas, you've got to have access to a gas pipeline, a gas source. It's just a much harder field to break into. But with batteries, pretty much if you can find a connection point and a friendly Chinese supplier or Tesla, Bob's your uncle, so to speak.
Yes. Well, yes, yeah. And the QED, the Quarterly Energy Dynamics report, I know you know it's old news, but it does actually confirm that battery storage were bidding very, very high, particularly in June over a couple of days. And as your article pointed out, it just takes a few hours of that extremely high pricing to sort of change the whole wholesale price outlook for the or result for the whole quarter. And this just basically comes from a couple of batteries bidding like crazy, back to lack of competition, because they can.
We lead to competition and the influence, a lot of these high price events will in fact be covered by cap contracts. So they don't necessarily affect retail, but what they do is they influence how the DMO and the forward outlook for price and the futures price.
Yes.
So that's another reason why people are interested in seeing these events.
David, it's been great to catch up with you in person again on a stage, which I think sort of changed the dynamic a little bit. But look, we've got through it. Thank you very much to Jigar Shah and to Kane Thornton for appearing on the podcast. Thanks also to you, David. And thanks to a lot of the people who came up during the conference and said how much they liked the podcast. And it was great catching up. And it was that was great getting the feedback. And thanks, of course, to our sponsors, Evergen and Pylon. And that was a bonus episode of the Energy Siders podcast. We've got another great interview coming up very soon. So you may hear from us again in the next couple of days or possibly early next week. But we haven't quite decided.
It's goodbye from him. It's goodbye from me.
Energy Insiders was brought to you by Evergen, the market-leading renewable energy software business that optimises residential and commercial solar and battery systems. Evergen enables large numbers of systems to operate as a single fleet, so network operators can use them as a virtual power plant, generating significant value for consumers, network operators and the energy system as a whole. Evergen software is powering the energy system of the future. Energy Insiders was also brought to you by Pylon. Pylon provides easy-to-use solar design software for installers and retailers with pay-as-you-go pricing, no monthly cost and no lock-in contracts. Join Australia's top solar companies who trust Pylon to design high-resolution, CEC-ready solar proposals.